Good morning. This is David Plazas, Community Conversation Editor of the News Press. It's June 27th, 2012. We have the privilege of having with us Representative Gary Aubuchon, who is running for Congress District 19 in the state of Florida. Before we begin, editorial board members, would you please introduce yourselves for the record?
Hunter Leak, alumnus of the editorial, News Press editorial board.
Pam Grotehouse from Bonita Springs.
I'm Lewis and Signaris from South Fort Myers.
Jim Powers, I'm an alumnus also.
Carry everyone in the News Press.
Bob Rath.
And Representative Aubuchon, tell us, why are you running for this position?
Well, if I could, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about my background. So basically who I am, why I'm running, and then why I think I'm the best candidate for the job. If that's acceptable. Fundamentally, to understand who I am, and I think it's so important in political races, that we don't just understand how somebody might vote on a particular bill that's before Congress today that we're not going to see, and use that to determine whether or not we think this person is ideologically aligned with us or not, or would make the right decisions. I think it's paramount, much like a job description, that we look at where somebody has come from, what they've done, before we decide what they can do for us. And so I always like to take a step back and give you a little background. I was the son of Ed and Ginny Aubuchon. Ed went into World War II, my dad, at age 15, to answer the call to his nation. And like many of the greatest generation, when he got out of the war, he married very young. He was 19, Mom was 16. I was the fifth of 6 kids. We grew up in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house on the outskirts of Detroit for 20 years in that house. So it was really from humble beginnings that I began. And my parents taught me 3 critical lessons, many lessons, but 3 of which I kind of hold on to this day. One is a love of this nation. Even though they only had 8th grade educations, they gave to me the biographies of our founding forefathers and some of the great leaders of America through the years. And I really came to understand as a youngster, and then later majoring in American history in college, the struggle to forge this country, and to create the Constitution, and how much work and sweat and toil went into that, and really how it's over time really revealed itself as a brilliant document. And so it was a respect of the country, a respect for the Constitution, and a reverence for those who have fought to defend it in the 200-plus years since. Second lesson they taught me was a belief in work and a strong work ethic. So at age 12, they encouraged me to go out and get a job when I started delivering papers and cutting lawns in my neighborhood. At 14, I was a cook at a local bar and grill that I could walk to, so I could save my money, and at age 16, bought my first car, got a better job, and eventually went off to the University of Michigan, where, as I said, I majored in American history. And then the last thing that's fundamental to who I am today is they really taught me about the promise of America, that America is a land of opportunity, that everyone is born with the same opportunity to make of their life what they can through their own efforts, their own intellect, their own blood, sweat, and tears, if you will. Why I'm running, why that's important, is I'm afraid that we're moving away from being a nation of opportunity, where we all have that equality in the beginning, to a land of entitlement, where it's not just enough that we have the opportunity, but when some of us don't achieve all that we expect to achieve, we expect then someone else to give us something to fill in that gap. And I'm very concerned that we're taking our nation on the wrong path. So when I came here into Lee County in 1984, fresh out of college, 22 years old, I went into real estate in Lehigh Acres. My wife Andrea taught high school at Riverdale. And then in 1989, I moved to Cape Coral, and in 1992 started a home building company in the living room and dining room of my house. 20 years later, in that time, we grew the company up, survived this great recession of Southwest Florida that was especially hard on the building and real estate industry. And we did it by making tough decisions, tough but necessary. And I'll remember the first time the first thing we did was cut back on all frivolous expenses like all businesses do. And the next thing we did was we cut the pay of the owners and managers of the company. And when that wasn't enough, we realized we had to start laying off. And I had never laid anybody off for anything other than non-performance. And I was really struggling with that. I didn't want to do it. And I talked to a colleague in an unrelated business, and she told me, Gary, if you don't, there will be no company left, and you will never have the opportunity to hire them back because it will be gone. And so with that as a way to sort of fortify myself, I went into successive rounds of layoffs. And we made it. We've come out the other side of this thing, and while it's nowhere near sunny days yet, we're on the rebound. We've rehired many of those same employees that we had to lay off. And I tell you that because that's a foundational moment, because in 2006, I was appointed to the Florida legislature. And the very first legislative session in 2007, we faced declining revenues, and we had to make some tough choices. And having seen the necessity of making those choices, that put me in a position to help make some of those tough choices in Tallahassee. In all 6 years I served, every year we faced declining revenue. And we balanced the budget 6 years in a row without raising taxes. In fact, we voted to decrease taxes 35 times in that 6-year period. Today, the budget we passed this past year was $70 billion. That is $3.9 billion less than it was 6 years ago, my first year in office, even though Florida's grown by almost 800,000 people in that time period. And there are more people dependent on state services. But the results are that Florida's now producing jobs at about twice the national rate. Even though we were one of the hardest hit states in the nation, we will soon, I believe, drop below the national unemployment level. 650 corporate CEOs across America recently rated Florida as the #2 state in which to own or operate a business. And I think that's because of the positive regulatory environment that we've created and some of the decisions we've put to put Florida back in stable ground. The bond market certainly has responded to that. Florida's bond rating went up to a AAA, while the federal bond rating went down. So why do I think I could be the best candidate? I mean, it's because when you look at the records of the 6 of us in this Republican primary, I'm the only candidate that has led in business here in Southwest Florida, led in our community here in Southwest Florida, and led in the Florida legislature. And I want to talk for just one moment about leadership in an elected body. There's a misnomer, and I don't believe it's necessarily held by people at this table, but by the general public it is, because I hear it quite a bit. And that is, if you're in a legislative body, you have to go along to get along. You can't, quote unquote, buck leadership. And I want to point to a specific vote. The current Speaker of the House is Dean Cannon. 2 years before he became Speaker, and it was already known that he would become Speaker, he ran a bill to open up state waters for offshore drilling. And the local waters are from the shoreline to 3 miles out. State waters are from 3 to 10, and then federal waters are from 10 miles out. Currently, there's no drilling off of Florida's Gulf Coast within 125 miles ashore. There's a prohibition in those federal waters from 10 to 125. Speaker Cannon, or Speaker Designate Cannon's bill, was going to open up the state waters, so we would have had no drilling 0 to 3, drilling 3 to 10, no drilling 10 to 125. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. And not only that, but to Southwest Florida could have been quite devastating. I voted against that bill. I was one of 2 or 3 Republicans in the House to vote against that bill. Now, you would have thought by doing that I would have sealed my fate in the House. But 2 years later, when Dean Cannon became Speaker of the House, he appointed me as his Rules and Calendar Chairman, arguably the #2 position in the House. So I bring that up because it is possible to thoughtfully, deliberatively, intelligently argue against what leadership is doing, hold true to your values and what's important to your constituents, and still succeed in the legislative process. And So I want to bring that experience, ground level in business and in the community, leadership within a legislative body, to Washington to make a difference.